Welcome to the third episode of Shadowy Spectrums. I'm your host, Peter Shelley. The focus of this show will be UFOs and other fantastic mysteries. Tonight, it is my special honor to interview Patricio Abusleme, a Chilean UFO researcher and author. I want to express a special thanks to Luis R. Gonzalez of Spain for suggesting this guest and for making this interview possible. Good evening, Patricio. How are
Hello.
you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. Welcome to the show. Please give us some information on your background and how you got involved in the subject.
Yes, I was interested in UFOs from my childhood. I began reading books on UFOs when I was about 11 years old. First, I read books by J.J. Benitez, a Spanish writer, from Antonio Rivera, and then I began reading books by other people like J. Allen Hynek, from Dr. Jacques Vallée, and others from John Keel. So I expanded my knowledge on the UFO literature, and I studied journalism. I am a journalist. I studied journalism because I wanted to be a ufologist, to have the skills to research and to interview people. And I work as a writer in written media, in newspapers in Chile, news agencies, and I also have researched about the UFO subject.
And Patricio, you have written a book about the most famous UFO case in Chile, the UFO case of Corporal Armando Valdés.
Yeah.
Which occurred on April 25th, 1977. Corporal Valdés would be Cabo Valdés. The title of your book is La Noche de las Sentinelles, The Night of the Sentinels. I was very impressed with your book, truly. You investigated every angle and possibility. Your investigation was truly exhaustive and comprehensive. Spectacular. My highest congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you for reading it, because I understand that you read a very rough translation of the book, and you took the time to try to see different aspects of the case and taking your time with that.
So why don't we go back in time? So please take us back, Patricio, to April 25th, 1977. Kind of describe the scene, give us the details of that historic night.
I will share my screen now, because I can share the screen. I wanted to show a map of where this took place, but it seems like the program. Now I can share you the screen. Here we have the United States. Here we have South America. Here, this very thin and long country is Chile. Is my home. I'm located here in Santiago, in the capital city of Chile. Corporal Valdés UFO case took place here in northern Chile, near the border with Peru and with Bolivia. It's very near a town, a very small town called Putre. Here we see Putre. Back then, the Chilean army had a headquarters there, and Valdés was located here, like to the west of Putre. a few kilometers, like 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, in a place called Pampa Yuscuma. He was the leader of a group of a total of 7 soldiers. There were 8 in total, the corporal and 7 conscript soldiers. Corporal Valdés was 22 years old, and the conscript soldiers were like 19 and 20 years old, were very young. And they were here taking care of horses. They were at some stable from the military, from the army, because they had the horses for military purposes. They didn't have vehicles like cars or trucks, something like stuff like that, but they had these horses. They were riders, you know, and they were doing this watch. It was a 24-hour watch every day, from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. of the next day. So they were here. They spent the whole day here taking care of the horses in this stable. And about 2 or 3 a.m. of the next day, they said that they saw some lights falling in these hills. They had these hills nearby, and they saw lights that they said came from the sky. One of them landed behind the hills, but the other one landed like in front of them, of this group of soldiers. And that light was very strange. They described it as being about 25 meters long, oval shaped, of a purple color, and in one notch of each of the extremes, it had like a red light in each of the extremes, the ends of this strange light.
Maybe why don't we show the picture of the
Okay.
object? Just in one moment, we will show the illustration, the artist's recreation of the UFO. Okay.
Okay. This is an illustration that was, I commissioned this to an artist, a Chilean artist named Oliverto Castillo Lauri. I told him what I wanted him to do with to represent the UFO encounter. So we are seeing here the object, oval shaped, purple in color, with the red lights at each one of its ends. And we have Corporal Valdés walking toward this light, and the soldiers behind. And this light behind the hills, because they said that the first light came down behind the hill, and they saw like light coming from that place, from the ground up. So yeah, this illustration is a very good representation of what the Valdés and the conscript told about the UFO encounter.
Okay, and then continuing, what happened? They see the UFO,
Yeah.
and what is happening?
They were very scared, and Valdés ordered the soldiers to take themselves, like arm to arm, to get like a chain, like arm chained, to remain together. But in one moment, Valdés got loose, and he walked forward to the light, the UFO. And then the soldiers said that he disappeared. They couldn't see him anymore, and they called out for him, and he didn't reply. They calculate, this is an estimate of time, that Valdés was missing for around 15 minutes. And at a certain moment, he returned. He reappeared, calling out for them, and he was having some trouble. He was like stumbling. He didn't recognize them. He was like laughing. He was looking at them with a very strange look on his face. And he said some words, with a strange voice that was like, "You'll never know who we are, where we came from, but we will return here again." And at one point, he lost the consciousness. According to one of the soldiers, he slapped Valdés in the face to make him react, but Valdés lost consciousness and was sleeping until the next morning. But one of the things that the soldiers noticed on Valdés was that he has a grown beard, because Valdés only used his mustache, and he was only with a mustache when he disappeared. But when he reappeared, he also had a grown beard, and his watch was a digital watch, one of the first ones from back then, was stopped at around 4:20 a.m. and the calendar was showing the April 30 instead of April 25. That is 5 days in the future. So they related this grown beard with the watch, with the time, 5 days time difference.
And excuse me, when the UFO was present, the animals had a reaction.
Yes, they had a dog, a German Shepherd, and they said that the dog was very brave, but when the UFO was in front of them, the dog was trying to get behind them. The dog was scared, and the horses, they were watching like 200 or 300 horses, were scared too, were trying to get behind one another, and where all of them were like fixated on the light, on the UFO, looking at it, and with the ears like standing up. That's the way they describe that.
And then what happened?
Then nobody really remembers how the UFO disappeared. Some of them said that the UFO at a certain moment just shoot off. Others said that it disappeared when the sun came up at dawn, but they don't really remember the moment when the UFO disappeared, because some of the soldiers also slept. It was a very confusing, very strange time, you know. The thing is that the next morning, about 6 in the morning, Corporal Valdés woke up. So he called the soldiers. He said, "Hey, did you see the same thing that I saw last night?" And they confirmed. They said, "Yes, my corporal, we all saw that, and you disappeared. And now you have a grown beard, and something happened." So Valdés ordered them to get a horse so he could go to Putre, to headquarters, to get some help. So Valdés got in the horse, went to the town, and he woke up Corporal Antonio Flores, who was his best friend back then. And he also woke up teacher Pedro Araneda, who was a local ufologist. He collected stories about UFO sightings in the near Putre, and Pedro Araneda with
So, at what point was the problem with the watch noticed? The
a
fact
tape
that
the first statements from Valdés and the soldiers.
I think we skipped a little bit. Continue. So the anomaly, the mystery of the watch, when was that discovered?
In the morning when they woke up, they noticed that Valdés had this grown beard, and that the watch was stopped, and the calendar date was wrong. So they went to headquarters afterwards, and they manipulated the watch to try to make it run again, and they did it. The watch continued working fine. It was not malfunctioning anymore.
And there is some controversy about weapons at the event. And did the soldiers fire at the UFOs?
Most of them said that they didn't have weapons because they were doing a watch, taking care of animals, of horses, so they didn't need weapons. But other soldiers say that they did have some carabines, like SIG rifles. And one of them told me that he tried to shoot the UFO, but when he tried to shoot, the rifle malfunctioned. It didn't shoot, so he couldn't shoot the UFO.
Tell us about the first newspaper reports, starting, I guess, on May 16th, 1977.
3 weeks after the UFO incident, the first headlines were published in La Estrella de Arica newspaper, and it was a hit, really. You can see here the picture of 5 of the 8 soldiers that had the experience. Armando Valdés is not in that picture, and the headline says that a UFO landed near Putre. It was very shocking back then because this was published on a Monday, and Chilean media published about this experience and other UFO sightings during all that week. It was a very, very famous, a very famous case, a very famous experience, and the news media was all about this case for that week. Not only La Estrella de Arica, but all Chilean newspapers.
Well, why don't we look at some other pictures right now?
That picture was taken by me on November 2002 on the offices of La Estrella de Arica, of this newspaper that published the original story. And there we see Armando Valdés watching the newspaper clippings from that time, because we traveled together to Arica and to Putre, to the site of the UFO incident in November 2002.
And then we have a front view of Valdés with the mustache somewhere here, with the glasses, I think. Okay.
Yes, that's 22-year-old Second Corporal Armando Valdés photographed by La Estrella Arica. This picture was published by La Estrella Arica in the time when he became a sensation here in Chile, and his story was also published abroad. Here you can see him only with his mustache, but this is the way he was when they were watching the horses. But after his disappearance during the UFO experience and reappearance, he also had a grown beard. So that was one of the most strange aspects of this case.
And here's a picture of the some of the other soldiers.
Yeah, there are 5 of them. I don't know why in 2 pictures we have, there are only 5 soldiers. At least they could have been 7, because we know that Valdés afterwards was sent to Santiago to have some tests done on him. These soldiers, yeah, they were 5 of the soldiers that lived this experience. The one on the left, this one is Pedro Rosales. Then we have Germán Reyes. In the middle, we have Humberto Rojas. Then we have Iván Robles. And the last one on the right is Juan Reyes. The first soldiers that saw the UFOs coming down were Juan Reyes and Pedro Rosales, because they were outside the stables doing a round. They take turns. They had some shifts to do some rounds around the stables, and these 2 were outside the stables when they saw the lights coming down, and they ran to alert Armando Valdés and the other soldiers.
And then there are 3 soldiers that are missing from this photo. Who are the missing soldiers?
The missing are Armando Valdés, Raúl Salinas, and the other one is Julio Rojas.
Ah.
There were 2 Rojas in the group, Humberto Rojas and Julio Rojas, but they are not related because Rojas is a fairly common last name here in Chile. Yeah, that picture was taken by me at the site. I don't remember if this one was taken in 2002 or 2009, because I traveled to the site 2 times. I think this one may have been taken in 2009, but this was the actual site where the UFO came down, where the UFO encounter took place. These are the hills around Pampa Yuscuma, near Putre. That picture is the same site, but this photograph was taken in 1977 by photographer Luis Daroch from La Estrella Arica newspaper. And this was published in La Estrella Arica. And that arrow is showing the trajectory of the UFO. It came down, the second UFO, the one that they have in front of them, came down and moved around the place. Here we have one of the witnesses, Humberto Rojas. In 2009, we went back to the site, and he's pointing to a sort of indentation on the ground. According to him, this indentation was left by the UFO in 1977. I personally don't think that. I think that it was something on some characteristic of the ground. I don't think that this is an indentation that remained for so long, for so many years. But according to Humberto, this was left here by the UFO, and he said that inside this indentation they found a piece of metal. That's me and Humberto on the site. Behind us, there's these hills where the UFOs came down. And here we have Humberto Rojas and Pedro Araneda. Pedro Araneda is a central, a very important person regarding this case, because he was the one who first heard the accounts a few hours after the incident, and he recorded the accounts of the soldiers and Corporal Valdés on tape. So the first publications in La Estrella de Arica were written hearing these tapes, because Pedro Araneda was the correspondent from La Estrella de Arica in Putre. That's a picture I took on the site from the probable position of the UFO looking toward the place where the stables were located and where the soldiers were. I try to put myself in the position of the UFO looking at the soldiers to have an idea of the other part, so to speak. This is Raúl Salinas. He's one of the conscript soldiers. It's a picture I took of him in 2006 when I interviewed him. We have an interview, and he was very coming. I don't know how to say it, witness. He was very very nice to give me his account, because there were other witnesses who didn't want to be interviewed, but it was very good to have his account on the experience. And this one is one of the witnesses, Julio Rojas, who I interviewed in 2002. And I consider his account also one of the most important, because up until 2000 or so, we only, and the media only focused on Armando Valdés, but this case was witnesses not only by Valdés, but by other 7 persons. So I wanted to ask the other witnesses about their accounts. This one is Antonio Flores. Is one of the main sources, one of the main persons on this case, because he was Armando Valdés' best friend. Back then, he was a corporal in the Chilean army too, and he went to Pampa Yuscuma a few hours after the incident, and he saw the state of shock of the witnesses. And this is Valdés on site in Pampa Yuscuma in 2002, when we traveled in November of 2002.
Okay. Now, the first television interview took place on Wednesday, May 18th, 1977. Tell us about that. What happened?
The case was already famous in the country and abroad. So Canal 13, that is a TV station here in Chile, sent journalist Pablo Norato to interview Armando Valdés. So he gave his account on television for the first time. So if people were interested by seeing him on the newspapers, they now could see and hear him telling his account on TV. And that interview, the complete interview, is in YouTube. You can see it in YouTube.
And then some American journalists came to investigate, correct?
Yeah, at the end of May in 1977, journalist Malcolm John Nichol and photographer Robert Wiley Jr. from the National Enquirer, they came to Chile to investigate the story. They couldn't speak with Valdés because Valdés was in Santiago at that time in the military hospital. They were doing some tests on Corporal Valdés, so they didn't have the chance to interview him. But I understand that they interviewed Pedro Araneda and they had access to the tapes and they heard the tapes with the first accounts.
And now there was an anomaly, which we mentioned about the watch.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we go to the picture of the watch and remind us what was the mystery about the watch?
Yeah, after the UFO incident took place, the next morning they noticed that the watch was stopped at about 4:20 a.m. in the morning, and the calendar was showing the April 30 instead of April 25. So when I have only managed to find those images of the watch, Armando Valdés was wearing this watch during the TV interview, and I managed to take these photos, but it's the only photos I have of the watch. I think it is the same watch. I don't think that Valdés changed for another watch afterwards. I think that's it, a digital watch.
So it was the 25th, but it was showing a date 5 days in the future, the 30th.
Yeah,
Now
that's right.
and the soldiers thought that was some kind of a message.
Yeah, I think that the soldiers and Pedro Araneda too, other people that knew about the story back then, thought that 5 days in the future was like a message that the UFO would return that day to Pampa Yuscuma. So they returned to Pampa Yuscuma 5 days later to see if the UFO would show up, but it didn't. It didn't show up.
And now, did you have some comment about possibility of metal? There was.
Yeah. The one who told that story is Humberto Rojas. He said that he found the piece of metal and they examined it and they thought that it was something related to the UFO. They said that it was very light. It didn't weigh much. So one of the journalists from La Estrella de Arica, Luis Daroch, the photographer, took that piece of metal because he wanted to get it analyzed in Arica in some university, but I haven't been able to trace that piece of metal because Luis Daroch died around 1985 in the 80s, so I haven't been able to locate that piece of metal. I don't know what happened with it.
Now, what happened to Valdés and the other soldiers after the incident? Were they discharged from military service?
No, that's a rumor that's false. That's totally false. They finished the military service. The soldiers, I'm speaking about the soldiers, the conscript. But Valdés, immediately after the UFO experience, first he was sent to Arica, to the city that was like nearby Putre in the coast. And from Arica, he was afterwards sent to Santiago to do some medical tests at the military hospital. And from Santiago, he was sent back to Putre only to be released from his service there. And he was transferred to another unit in southern Chile. And Valdés' family was from southern Chile. So he was happy because he was sent back to the region, to the area where he was from. And the conscript never saw him again. His friends from Putre, from the headquarters, didn't hear about him again in many years. And he continued his military career in southern Chile, near the places where he was from.
Now, a couple of years later, in 1981, a book was published called Secuestrados por Extraterrestres by Spanish researcher Antonio Rivera.
Yes.
The book contained one chapter on the Valdés case. Any comments?
Yeah, I read that book when I was like 14 years old, and I was very impressed because I read for the first time about the Corporal Valdés UFO case, a Chilean case, very important. So from that time, I had this dream of someday being able to research about it, to speak with Valdés, with the other witnesses, and I did it. So yeah, that book was like a starting point for me in the research of this case.
Now, for about 20 years, the case was dormant, correct? Nothing happened until 1999?
Yeah, we didn't hear about the witnesses, the conscripts. We heard very few things about Armando Valdés. Every now and then, he gave some interview in some local radio in southern Chile. So we knew from those interviews that he was now, he had converted to an evangelical religion, and now he had a new interpretation for the UFO incident. He thought that it was demonic in nature.
And then in 1999, Wednesday, June 16th, Valdés had his first television interview since 1977.
Yeah.
What happened?
He returned to TV for the first time in 22 years and to the public eye. So it generated a lot of interest. Millions of people, including me, saw that interview with extreme interest, hoping that he would say something new or would explain what had happened in 1977. But he didn't. He told something new, some new bits of information, but he really didn't clear up what happened. And he promised to publish a book at the end of 1999 that he hasn't published until now.
So the book was never published.
Not yet, at least.
And do we know why not?
I don't know, but maybe he have had any problems with publishers or to get it done, because writing a book is not something easy. It's something very hard. But I suspect that his book, it's about his religious beliefs. Maybe he speaks about a little about the UFO experience, that he relates to what happened afterwards with his conversion to the evangelical faith, and it's more about his beliefs.
When and why did you start to consider writing your own book? Was this prompted by the fact that Valdés hadn't published his own?
No, it didn't have anything to do with that. It was because I was very interested in this story for many years, and I saw that in the other countries, in the USA, for example, every great UFO case has its own book, like the Travis Walton case, the Betty and Barney Hill case, have great books, sometimes written by other people, journalists and such. And Valdés, the case didn't have any real investigation afterwards. So I wanted to see if I could research the case after so many years, to relocate the witnesses, to ask them what happened, to see if they had anything new to tell. And then when I managed to do that, to get the whole story of almost of the story, I constructed the book.
After months of searching, you managed to contact Armando Valdés, Garrido. And I guess that was a Wednesday, August 7th, 2002. What happened?
I spoke with him over the phone. I was in Santiago, he was in Temuco, in a city in southern Chile. So I explained to him that I wanted to speak with him because I needed to know what happened in 1977. And back then he was doing some research on his own, because he had never gone back to the site in 22 years. And he wanted to do that because of his book. He wanted to include something about that in his book. So since we had some common goals, we collaborated. We met in Santiago first, and then we traveled together to Arica in northern Chile, and we went to Putre and to Pampayuscuma, to the place where the UFO encounter took place. And I recorded a video there on site with Armando Valdés, and he was explaining what had really happened. And according to him, in the 15 minutes, the approximate 15 minutes that he was missing, he was actually urinating. He went to another place in the outside the stables to urinate. So when he told me about that the first time, I believed him, because I was trying to explain the whole thing in conventional terms. But afterwards, when I tried to compare that account with the account of the other witnesses, I came to the conclusion that the original version is the right version, the right one. I think that Valdés changed the part where he was disappeared because of his current religious beliefs, because there's some problem, I think, with the idea of alien abductions with his beliefs as in his church with the evangelicals.
Now, you discovered that there was alcohol at the scene. The Coco Roco?
Mm-hmm. It was a very high, how do you speak it? The high grade alcohol. It's very strong. But according to Valdés, they had a tin can of Cocoroco. But when this happened, they hadn't drunk much of it, because he took the Cocoroco, the tin can, to throw it to the bonfire, and it was heavy. So it was almost full, the tin can. They hadn't drunk much of it. So I don't think that they were drunk. They were okay.
And now in 1980, Valdés had a UFO sighting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, that was published in the newspapers. He was in southern Chile in a military campaign in Punta Parra, in a place near Concepcion. that is one of the main cities in southern Chile, and he and other people from the Chilean army saw like a ring, like a luminous ring in the sky that night. And this was about February 11th, 1980. But what the newspapers never published, because this was found out years later by James Overg, a space consultant. It was that sighting, that particular sighting, was a Soviet launching of a rocket with a satellite or something like that, but it was a space launch. It was not a UFO.
And then you reminded Valdés of a Men in Black incident that he spoke about during his 1999 TV interview. Please share his story of meeting MIBs and the letter H.
Yeah, what he told me about that is rather vague, because he didn't remember the exact date when this happened. He was working in some military unit in a city in southern Chile. I don't remember, it was Temuco or Concepcion, something like that. And he was visited by these two men. I think it was in the 80s. And these men asked him if he was the Corporal Valdés who had the UFO encounter in 1977. And they made him draw or connect some symbols and letters in a sheet of paper. And finally, he arrived at the letter H. And then they said, yeah, you are the Corporal Valdés from the UFO encounter. And he said that they were two men. When one of them was young, the other one was older, and the older one was the one doing the questions. And they left. And he was very puzzled, because for some reason that he can't explain, from some months or years before, he always had a letter H in his wallet, and he avoided places with the H, like these places with the big H in the ground for the helicopters to land. He avoided that, but I don't know why, and I don't think that he knows either.
So he had a metallic H in his wallet,
Yeah,
and
that
also
was,
in his briefcase, supposedly.
yeah, that's what he said in the 1999 interview, the TV interview. He said that, but I haven't been able to make any sense out of it. I don't know what's that about.
And he also expressed a habit of writing an H on the table or other surface with water that was left in his teacup or with breadcrumbs. And this habit of writing an H was known to his friends and family. Now, the men that talked to him, the MIBs, looked like normal Chileans, correct? They were in civilian clothes.
I think so. I don't know if he mentioned if they're wearing suits or in civilian clothes, but they were like normal people.
But they had an unusual comment about where they were from, didn't they? They say they were aliens.
I actually don't remember that, but I don't think so.
Aliens from a planet that is behind the moon. That was in your book. I remember your book.
Yeah, but Valdés maybe said that to me when we spoke about that.
Aliens from a planet that is behind the moon.
But I don't think that he believed that. Maybe that's something that they told to him, but many people over the years have come to him with very strange stories, very strange accounts, but
Well,
sometimes he thought that they were crazy people, but this particular time he was like very puzzled, very impressed because of the thing with the letter H.
and what do you think was the significance of the H?
I have
Did
no idea. No, I don't know.
did he?
I could relate it with a helicopter. That it's one of the theories that we have for the whole case. That maybe he saw helicopters in
Hmm.
1977, but I really don't know.
And Valdez didn't ask the MIBs directly that question.
I don't think so, or at least he didn't tell me. As I say, his recollections on that episode were rather vague.
Now, was the a little bit more on the H? Was the H? Do you know? Was the H exactly the normal letter H or different design?
I think it was like the normal letter H.
The
By
reason
some,
I
yes, somehow they years later they related it to the Umo affair.
that's
The
what I was going to
symbol.
ask.
Yeah, but
And
I don't think that was Valdez. It was people, friends of Valdez, who knew about the UFO cases and stories, and they tried to relate the age with the UMO symbol, but I don't think that there were anything related to that.
uh, and uh, so you don't think there was any connection?
I don't think so, but of course I could be wrong. I don't know, but I don't think so.
Now, Pat, who do you think the men really were? Extraterrestrials?
I don't know, but I don't think so. Maybe they were just people, many people that over the years have gotten in touch with Valdez to ask him about the experience or relate their own experiences to him. He has been approached by many people over the years who have told him very bizarre stories. Maybe there were some of those peoples.
What about an intelligence agency?
It could be, but we are speculating. We really don't know who those people were.
And now later, Valdez expressed the opinion that UFOs and abductions are a demonic forgery of the rapture of the church.
Mhm.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, that's the part where his religion, in my opinion, it's distorting the events. Because in 1977 the UFO encounter took place in a certain way, but in my opinion, the religion faith, the religious faith of Valdez made him distort part of the experience to interpret it in a certain way with this demonic nature of the experience. But that's, in my opinion, because of his religious beliefs. It's not a demonic experience per se.
Now, when he related the events when you're at the location, Valdez mentioned the animal reactions.
Mhm.
Tell us about the dog and his reaction to the UFO.
The dog was a German Shepherd that was very brave, according to Valdez and the soldiers. But when the UFO was present, the dog was trying to get behind the soldiers. He was scared, the animal. And the horses also were like scared with the phenomenon because they were trying to yet one behind the other, everyone looking at the lights, at the UFO, with their ears standing up. So they also perceived the phenomenon. It was not like an illusion or a vision from Valdés and the soldiers, but was something perceived also by the dog and the horses.
Have you ever personally seen horses react this way in any situation, getting one behind the other, or heard of horses doing this kind of thing?
I have
you heard
not,
of it?
but then again, I don't know much about horses. So maybe people who work with horses have seen any reaction like that in any particular situation, but I never heard of it before.
Now, again, Valdés had the opinion that that the UFOs were possibly satanic
Mhm.
or something strange. What was his reasoning for that idea?
I think that it was because of his religious beliefs. He became an evangelical around 1982 or 83, and then the whole experience, in my opinion, he was interpreting the experience according to his new beliefs. He's very involved with his religious congregation. He is a professor of religion. He's like a priest in his community. He's a pastor in his church. So I think that that's definitely distorting some way his own interpretation on the UFO encounter.
At the when he was at the military hospital, Valdés said he had a electroencephalogram, interviews with various doctors and tests.
Mhm.
Quote, the last thing which amazed me the most was the recorded exam that Major Eduardo Aragada gave me, and that recording would be submitted to a lie detector test. Do we know anything about that? Do we know if the lie detector test was done and the results?
I don't know. I tried to find something about that, but I couldn't. If that existed or if that actually exists now, that might be part of the military archives, But what we do have, it's a copy of the two reports. There were two medical reports, a psychological report and a psychiatric report on Valdés, and we have a copy of them. There were the conclusions because he was examined mainly by people from that area, from psychologists and psychiatrists, to see if he was crazy or he was sane.
And what were the results of the medical report?
They concluded that Valdés was having an hallucination, that he and the conscript, they didn't really see UFOs, but it was an hallucination, and they recommended that Valdés was transferred to another unit, and that's exactly what happened afterwards. Valdés went back to Putre only to uh, to say goodbye to his unit and to his friends, and he was transferred to the south of Chile.
And they actually called it a cultural hallucination.
Mhm.
What is
Because
that?
because it's something that has to do with the I think with the pop culture and with the imaginary the image the imaginary the collective, what people collectively have in their minds, like in that time with UFOs and all this space related stuff.
When Valdés was being studied and tested at the military hospital, he claims he was visited by members of the Chilean Air Force and shown a specific book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, he was visited by several members of the military forces, but I think that it was most because they were curious about what he had seen. Since he was in the newspapers and in TV, they wanted to speak with him and to ask him what had happened. But I don't remember the exact book that they show him there. I remember another book that was shown to Valdés and to the conscripts in Putre after the experience happened. And they thought that it was a book from NASA. And it was not a book from NASA. It was a book from Antonio Rivera, the same author that we were talking about. Is a book called Platillos Volantes ante la Cámara, that it shows pictures, different pictures of UFOs, different cases from before 1977, and that's a book that Pedro Araneda had. Since Pedro Araneda was a UFO researcher, he had some books on the subject, and they showed him books, this book with pictures of UFOs, and Valdés and the conscripts pointed to a certain picture because it had some resemblance to what they had seen in Pampa Yuscuma. But it was not a book from NASA or anything like that. That's stories that people create afterwards, that NASA was involved somehow, but that's not true in this case.
Now, when Valdés was in the hospital, he claims he was allowed to keep his revolver on his bedside table in plain sight. What do you make of that?
He thinks that maybe they were trying to see if he would use the gun to shoot himself, if he was crazy. But he has also said that maybe they left that there for him to defend himself if the UFOs returned or something like that. But that's what he told me. He told me that those are the ideas that he had regarding the gun. But as for me, I don't know. I find it very odd, very strange that a person, maybe a crazy person, could be left there with a gun, you know.
For years, there was a general opinion that the Chilean army had silenced the entire episode and treated it as a military secret, similar to the US and the UFO subject. Please tell us your understanding of what really happened.
I don't think so. No, I don't think that the Chilean army tried to cover up the case at all. What really happened is that the military was trying to change some parts of the story with another purpose. They didn't want to know the Peruvians or the Bolivians to know that they had horses there in that site, because that was a military secret. You would think that is something ridiculous, you know, but for the military back then it was important. It was a military asset because they used the horses to move around in the very irregular terrain in the high plateau. So they asked to read the newspaper publishings before they were published to change certain things, because they were expecting maybe some renewed hostilities with Peru and with Bolivia. In 2 years from in 1979, there was the 100th anniversary of the Pacific War that was fought by Peru and Bolivia against Chile, and Chile won the war, and Chile kept
Congratulations.
No, I don't think it's something good or something to be proud of, because it's something that brought problems that remain up until today.
Really?
Chile captured some very extensive lands that were Bolivian and now are Chilean. The place where this incident took place was, I don't know, it was Bolivian or Peruvian, So it was something very grave for up until today for Peruvians and Bolivians. So Chile was expecting renewed hostilities because of this anniversary, and they were reinforcing the Chilean forces in the north, and they didn't want the Peruvians and the Bolivians to know about the existence of these horses in the high plateau. So they made the newspaper they made them to change some things about the story. So if you read the original publishings, they never mention that there are horses there, and they also say that Valdés was leading a military patrol, and that's a lie. That's not true. It was not a military patrol. It was a watch. 8 people watching and taking care of horses, not a military patrol.
And what is hypothesis 3? What is that?
It was the hypothesis that Peru, Bolivia could unite again to attack Chile, and maybe taking advantage of that, Argentina on the east could also attack Chile. Chile and Argentina were close to going to a war in 1978, 1 year after the case. So it was a real danger of wars with all the neighbors of Chile, with Peru, with Bolivia, and with Argentina. That was the hypothesis 3 from the north and from the east.
And it would be a war for territory, correct?
I think so. I think that all wars are for territory or for resources. I don't know, but it was a very tense time in the relation. Remember that when this happened, Chile was also under a military dictatorship from Augusto Pinochet. So it was a dictatorship. The military were in control of the country, and there was also another dictatorship in Argentina. So those were like the times, very strange times.
Now, over the years, people have wondered if Valdés ever had hypnotic regression.
Mm-hmm.
You discovered information that perhaps a regression took place in mid-August 1999. Please give us the story on that.
Yeah, it did. It did happen. It happened. This was a very small group of people. There were 2 army officers, but they were personal friends with Valdés. This was not a thing from the army as an institution. These were like 2 friends of Valdés who were also army officers. One of them was a dentist, an odontologist, and he knew how to do hypnotic regressions. So they decided to make a regression on Valdés, only to try to see if he could remember what had happened in the UFO encounter in 1977. So they did this hypnotic regression, and Valdés remembered entering to the UFO that they had closer when he got loose from the soldiers, and he walked forward. He walked to this light, and he entered this light. That's what he said under hypnosis, and inside this place, this UFO, he remembered seeing everything with like red lights all around, and he remembers seeing like three people with white helmets. So when he described that, the people who were doing the regression thought that he was describing pilots. That's where the hypothesis of the helicopters come from.
Well,
But
one moment. Let's look at. You have some illustrations.
yeah,
Okay. So, and the other one. First, the other one. The other one. Okay. So this is the three pilots, or
yeah, there are two pilots. This is like an artist's conception of that episode. This was made by a Chilean artist named Sacha Finsterbuch, and he here we see Valdés with these two alleged pilots, and Sacha made them like pilots from military pilots from a helicopter or a military airplane.
So this is a speculation of of
absolutely.
what he was perceiving during the
Yeah,
hypnosis. And then we have this one here.
yeah, that's something very strange that happened when he was relating this under hypnosis. The people that were present during the session said that when Valdés was recalling entering in the UFO and seeing these three people with white helmets, he began levitating on the bed where he was lying. He was lying on a bed and he was speaking about his encounter. And when he recalled this particular part, he began levitating. So yeah, it's a very controversial part of the story. This allegedly happened in 1999. I wasn't there. I didn't see this. So I can't say that this really happened. But the people who were there were three people. I interviewed two of them, and they told me this, and I think that they were telling me the truth. I think they are trustworthy people, but I can explain this levitation on Valdés. I don't even try to explain. I don't know if it has any relation to the original UFO experience, but it's another anecdote, another curiosity.
So the individuals involved in the hypnosis speculated that it was actually foreign agents, foreign human agents, Soviet or U.S., operating in the border area between Chile, Peru, and Bolivia.
Mm-hmm. That's right. One of the guy who made the regression, he had this hypothesis that Valdés saw helicopters, because back then Peru was being helped with military hardware by the Soviet Union, and Chile was being helped by the USA, not in a open way, but in a more cover up way, in a clandestine way. I don't know how to say it. The United States was trying to help with Chile. We know that the United States and the CIA were present and for the military coup in 1973. So the United States probably remained during the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. And this person, the guy who performed the hypnosis, he thought that what Valdés and the Conquist saw were helicopters that made an incursion into Peruvian territory And when they were getting back to Chilean territory, one of the helicopters had a malfunction. So it came down behind that hill, and the second helicopter came down in front of the soldiers, and Valdés was the only one who realized what it really was.
So no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You discovered information that it possibly the CIA may have perpetrated UFO hoaxes in South America.
Yeah.
What information do you have about that?
It's really speculation. I have to say, it's interesting, but it's only speculation up until now. You know. It happens that in 2016, I read in a blog from a American ufologist named Rich Reynolds about some accounts from a man named Bosco Nedeljkovic. Rich Reynolds said that in the late 70s, he spoke with a man named Bosco Nedeljkovic, who claimed to have participated in UFOs created by the CIA. He was like living in Brazil, you know, at in 1957, and he claimed to have participated in several operations where the CIA simulated UFO encounters to make some tests on people of new drugs or stuff like that, like psychological warfare. And one of the incidents related by this Bosco Nedeljkovic, it's probably was like the famous Antonio Vilas Boas case in Brazil, because it matches the time frame and the location. And he said that they were using helicopters to release some drugs to make the people get sleepy, you know, to have hallucinations, and to do tests on them. So we don't have confirmation of this kind of experiments from other people or from the official documents. But if anything like what was related by Bosco Nedeljkovic really happened, maybe 20 years later in 1977, Valdés' case was also a product of one of these simulated UFO encounters. And maybe there were many other simulated UFO encounters, and that's why we have so many relevant cases in the 60s and the 70s. And afterwards, it seems that we didn't have great cases anymore like in those decades. So I found that interesting, like a theory to explain so many important cases in the 60s and the 70s, if they were part of a program, a human program, that in a certain moment ended. So we didn't have any great cases anymore, or not so many as in those decades.
Now, recently on a show with witness Humberto Rojas, you suggested this stealth helicopter concept. What was his opinion and why? What was his reaction?
He doesn't think that they saw helicopters. He
Why not?
thinks that because Valdés told me that too. They said that they had seen helicopters, they who have identified them because they knew how helicopters were. They would have heard the helicopters, and they didn't hear anything. So yeah, the speculation by my part was that maybe they saw some new kind of helicopter that was quieter. They didn't make much noise, or maybe they saw the first, I don't know, prototypes of a drone, for instance. I don't know, but they don't think so. They think that what they saw was something really strange and not related to anything that they knew about
Do you think
back then.
do you think the animals would have reacted with fear to helicopters?
Maybe because of the noise, but this thing didn't have any noise. When you, I have seen it myself here where I live near my house. Before you see a helicopter flying around, you hear it. The helicopter is very far away, and you can hear it because it's very loud. And they didn't hear anything back then.
Now, in the same program, Umberto revealed that he believed he had some kind of MIB encounter in a taxi, I think.
Yeah,
Can you explain that incident?
he told me about that years ago. That he was in he after getting his military service done, after he finished the military service, afterwards he entered into the police, the Chilean police force. He was a police for many years in Carabineros de Chile. And when he retired from the police, he worked, and I understand that he still works as a taxi driver, a cab driver. Yeah, a taxi driver. So he told me that one time he was driving his taxi, and two very strange people made him stop and enter into the taxi. And they were like tall with suits and stuff. And he was like scared. And to talk about anything, to make some chat, he said, "I think I know you," he said to these people. And the people, the guys, the men there said, "Yeah, we know you too," something like that. And he was scared, and they went down from the taxi. They took down in a place where there was nothing, and he claims that they like disappeared. He looked in the rear mirror, and the guys were gone, or something like that. The thing that I knew recently is that this incident allegedly took place in 2009, right after Humberto took me to the airport in Arica, because I went to Arica in 2009, and I traveled with Humberto to the site in Putre. And afterwards, when I returned to Santiago, Humberto took me to the airport, and this MIV alleged encounter who have taken place right before, right after he left me at the airport. I didn't know that. I heard that like a few months ago. So it's strange, but I don't make anything out of it. It's a very strange story, but this type of cases have many strange stories, anecdotes. I don't know what to think about that.
Now, in your book, you say, quote, there are at least two episodes that occurred during the years of the dictatorship that we know for sure were mounts, meaning hoaxes, perpetrated or at least manipulated by the agents of the state. The alleged appearance of the Virgin in the Peniblanca Villa Alameda, mid 1983, and the excessive publicity received by the passage of Halley's Comet in 1986. What happened in those cases, and why do you say they were hoaxes or manipulated?
Mhm. de la Virgen de Peña Blanca.
Uh-huh.
In about 1983, there were some very publicized visions of or appearances of the Virgin, the Holy Virgin Mary, and many people believed in those appearances. But many years later, we have had confirmation that those alleged appearances were manipulated by the military back then, who were in control of the country during the dictatorship. So they tried to make this fuss about the Virgin to divert the attention of the public, so the public didn't see the protests and the problems that the military were having, because in the 80s the protests began to bring down the government, the military government. So they manipulated these appearances with that purpose. And in 1986, one of the ministers of the military in control of Chile had the idea of publicizing, over publicizing actually, the passing of the Halley comet, because the Halley wasn't very visible from this part of the world, from South America. It was more visible in other parts of the world, but it was over publicized here for the same reason, to divert the attention of the public to things in the sky and not to see what was happening on the ground. So what happens? There are some people that think that the case of Valdés, the UFO encounter in 1977, was also like a publicity stunt from the dictatorship. It was made by Augusto Pinochet regime, but I tried to look into that to get some confirmation, some accounts, and I haven't been able to find anything that points in that direction.
Interesting. Now, in February 2016, you sent some FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I filed some requests to ask American departments for information on this case, to see if they have anything on that, if they were actually responsible for the UFO sighting, if they were CIA or anything like that, and I couldn't get anything. The DOD, the Department of Defense, said that they didn't have anything, but the CIA said something very strange. But I think that's the regular answer, that they couldn't confirm or deny having information related to my request. That was what they replied. But some people said that it was like a very common answer from the CIA.
So after all this investigation, what is your final conclusion? Do you have one?
I have like provisional conclusions. I don't have a final conclusion yet.
Okay.
Because I don't have all the information that I would need. But my conclusion is that something really happened. This was not an invention by Valdés or the Conquist or anything like that. They really had an encounter with something very strange, that they were frightened, and Valdés didn't go to urinate. I think that's not the correct story. I think that he did have a major approach to this phenomenon, and something happened to him that left him changed physically, with this grown beard, and with the phenomenon on his watch. I don't think, like many people think, that he lived 5 days in 15 minutes. I don't think that happened. I think that for him, the time was the same, like for the rest of the soldiers, like 15 minutes or something like that. But that his changes were provoked but by his closeness to this phenomenon. He got closer to the UFO than the soldiers. So something happened to him for being so close to this thing. I don't know what it was.
Is there anything further that you could imagine being investigated about the case? Is there anything more to do?
Yes, from the 8 original witnesses, I only interviewed 4 in depth because the other 4 didn't want to be interviewed. I only spoke with them by phone. So if anything was interested in researching more about this case, they could try to locate the remaining 3, because one of them died like in 2018, and they could be located, the remaining 3, and be interviewed to have their accounts. I don't have their accounts on the case, on the sighting.
Well, I have a kind of opinion, of course, based on my limited research compared to your massive investigation. But it's apparent to me that Valdés changed his testimony about what happened. The testimony of the other witnesses appears to have been consistent. Now, the reports of the animal reactions of extreme fear has never changed. Animals don't have cultural hallucinations. So based on the animal reactions, if that really happened, I would say that an authentic anomalous event occurred. Animals don't have that reaction to normal phenomena. I don't know about if an abduction occurred or not, but something strange definitely happened, in my opinion. Now, I was also interested in the possibility of what remote reviewing could discover about this case. I contacted Dr. Angela Thompson Smith, who is a specialist in remote viewing, and she agreed to have her students remote view the event. And at this point, I'm going to welcome the very patient Dr. Angela Thompson Smith. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me on your show.
And welcome, and thank you for waiting so long. And but I think it was important to hear some additional background. So why don't Angela, why don't you give us some background on yourself and talk about the remote viewing that you and your students were involved with, please.
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit more about my background first. My professional work early on was as a state registered nurse and social worker in England. And then I went into research and eventually ended up with a PhD in psychology. And I worked in research at the PEAR Lab at Princeton University. That's the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, which is no longer functioning. But they studied something called remote perception with ordinary people that could close their eyes, send their mind to a particular location and describe it. So these were not trained psychics, these were ordinary people. And Princeton found that there was a lot of correspondence between what these viewers, these perceptions were being told and the actual events. Then from there I came to Las Vegas, and I worked for a couple of years with a famous philanthropist called Robert Bigelow, who has now gone into aerospace development in Las Vegas. Got to view his facility a couple of years ago, which was amazing. What I'm doing now is I had trained with two of the ex-military remote viewers from the Stargate unit, Paul Smith and Lynn Buchanan. And since then, I have opened up my own school, and I'm actually teaching virtually now on Zoom, and teaching between 4 and 5 students at a time how to use remote viewing, not just to teach them what remote viewing is or how to do it, but how to use it. So I'm teaching them applications. And that's how this project came about. It was a group that really wanted to get into a little bit more meat of remote viewing and have something challenging. And when you contacted me and asked me about to do the project, I was a little bit what's called too front-loaded, which meant I had too much information to be objective. So I said, hey, this is going to be ideal for the students.
Excellent. And then, so on November 20th, 21st, and 22nd of last year, 2020, you had a group of 5 students do the remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were located in different parts of the country, even outside the United States.
Right. I had a couple in Canada and one in California, and I think the other one, I'm trying to think where the other, Texas and one here in Nevada.
And now they had some prior remote viewing training, correct?
Yes, some had trained with me and some had trained with other schools of remote viewing. Yeah, so these weren't I have total beginners, but these had some information already. Yeah.
Now, your report says that the students carried out 3 one-hour solo pen and paper remote viewing sessions. The first session was done blind. What does that mean?
That meant that all they had was an alphanumeric, not latitude and longitude. What they were given was an alphanumeric, which was FRP 879, which was a random series of letters and numbers assigned to this particular target, to the portrait target. They had no other information for their first session.
And what was your reaction to the general results?
It was very interesting. They went away on their own in their own locations with that coordinate and their pen and paper. And they didn't use any particular method like the military CRV method, or they just used their own natural, intuitive remote viewing methods, and came back after an hour and pooled their sessions. And we did a little bit of discussion and analysis on what they found. And I was very surprised that they were talking about horseshoe shapes, possibly connected to a ranch and a horse, and lights in the sky, more than one race watching, a disappearing biological in conjunction with the lights. So this was really good confirmation for me that they were what we call being on signal line. They were all on the same page with the data.
And Patricio, what was your reaction to the general results? What did you think?
Yes, I will be very blunt, I tend to be a skeptic about the remote viewing.
Of course.
I know what it is. I know that they practiced this in the Stanford Research Institute in the 70s. It was funded by the military, by the CIA. I know about Ingo Swann, about Yuri Geller. I know about that. I didn't know before that it was also used to explore events from the past. I thought that it was only used to explore current events in other places.
Anything.
Yeah. And some of the results didn't make much sense to me, but others were really impressive. I remember one in particular where they speak about male biological. It's very, very strange, the language that they use for
well,
the
that's
people
what they're told
not
to use to be very specific in remote viewing. Yeah,
they spoke about male biological drinking coffee. That was something that I don't think that you or your students had the information, but Valdés and the soldiers were actually drinking coffee before the lights came down and the whole event took place. So yeah, there were parts that were very impressive for me to see, to read. I was very impressed by some of the impressions of the remote viewers.
And there's also this concept of telepathic overlay. Some people criticize remote viewing, saying, well, there are people around who know about this event. But just listening to what you had said, Patricio, in your talk, I had no idea. I had never heard any of this. But the viewers recounted some of that in their sessions. So when they did the second session, they just explored now some of this horseshoe connection, etc. And then they came back with that there were experiments, they talked about time travel and change, an emotional event. A male was involved, man, horses, and beings. Horses, a corral and a ranch involved, a disappearance and a reappearance, an undeclared secret. I didn't know any of that. I just knew the barest minimum from Peter, because I try and stay what's called legally blind, which means I know as little as possible about a topic that the viewers are remote viewing. So they can't get it from me through telepathy, because that is a very real phenomenon. So I was amazed with what they got.
Yeah, now in getting some feedback, breaking the results down into perceptions about the location of the event. As I studied the report, the source, UFOs, the event, the UFO occupants, and things that don't seem to fit. What was your reaction, Patricio, to the location perceptions? Specifically about the location.
They got it right. The general.
Yeah, wasn't it amazing?
Yeah, the description of the place was really spot on. And we didn't have only one remote viewer, we have 5.
Right.
We had 5 remote viewers. So,
they worked as a team. Yeah.
And none of them, not one of them, spoke about Valdés going to urinate, because that has always been my doubt. I always think maybe Valdés is telling the truth now, but I doubt it. And he didn't say that under hypnosis, and none of the remote viewers said that. On the contrary, they confirmed the story about the UFO encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were not primed for any of this, a land-based target at all.
Exactly.
But they got a lot of really good information. And you have to remember that remote viewing is not always 100%. It's used as an adjunct method, which means if you have a case or you have an event, you'll bring remote viewers in to give you more information, perhaps the missing piece of information that you need, or some leads, say in a case, a missing person case. That's the whole role of remote viewing. It's not, oh, here are remote viewers, they're going to solve the case. So that's the route I take when I'm explaining it.
Yeah, I was impressed by the location perceptions. For example, perceived the words Montenegro, which means Black Mountain, and there is one in the background, the volcano.
Yeah.
Perceived a horseshoe shape, which we already mentioned. Biologicals grouped in a crowd. followed by a perception of a basin with snakes. Now, you've probably noticed, Patricio, if there's snakes in that area. I imagine there might be. Perceived a bunch of horses. That's definitely correct. And flat land looks like Wyoming. Now, that's incredible. Yeah, that I would agree with that. Perceived cattle fencing, square plots, huge. Now, what do you think about the perceptions about the source of the UFO?
There was some speculation. I think the viewers were really speculating when they were talking about locations of the lights and the entities. They weren't told there were entities. This was something they had come up with, and I just asked them to go and look further. And so I think there was a lot of speculation going on there in terms of the types of ETs, the locations of ETs, etc. So I'm not giving that as much weight as the location and the event itself.
Patricio, what did you think about the perceptions about the source of the UFOs?
It's very interesting. I think that maybe the witnesses could say it more accurately because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I really wish I had been there with them to see what they saw, but I wasn't. I always felt that I arrived on the site too many years later. I should have been there with them, but as I said, some things that I read on the reports of the remote viewers, they didn't make much sense to me, but others were really very impressive about this being an actual UFO encounter, a very strange encounter with something. I don't know why. I have even thought that maybe Valdés and the conscripts, when they saw these lights coming down and stuff, were really seeing the remote viewers going back in time to see the event. I don't know if that's possible at all, but
I don't think that's ever been tested. Yeah, no, that would be an interesting. Yeah, that would be an interesting experiment.
I don't know if remote viewers manifest themselves in any way when they are exploring.
I think it's unlikely because it's a perception. It's not. There is something called remote influence, which is the opposite face of remote viewing. But these folks were just concentrating on remote viewing and perceiving information, receiving it. So I think it was unlikely that they manifested anything at the target site.
Now, one remote viewer had some perceptions about Mars being the source of the UFOs and volcanic activity with an in-ground crater. Another remote viewer perceived the origins of the UFOs to have been between Jupiter and Uranus, a planet with double rings. Now, that sounds like Saturn. That's what you would imagine. However, I looked into this and was surprised to discover some objects between Jupiter and Uranus I wasn't aware of. The planetoids Chariklo and Charon. Chariklo has 2 rings, and with Charon, it is a possibility. It has a ring. But perhaps he is indicating something else entirely because he describes the rings as one on top and one on the bottom. The rings of the known objects are in parallel orientation. And of course, I'm not forgetting, Male M had the perceptions about Mars.
Right. And again, it was very much speculative. Yeah.
Now, perceptions about the event. Now, this was very accurate because we have the information. There was a shooting star or light seen. Another perception, vast open space. There are stars of lights in the sky, an explosion bright. A shooting star was perceived, sounds of bing, pop, a repeating signal. Something flying or moving through the sky, an event with a flash. Now, two pieces that were split with a chaotic, wrangling movement, thoughts of splitting the atom, nuclei and boson. Now, there was one witness, Patricio, who said the UFO, there was one UFO and it split in two, correct? One of the witnesses commented on that. Whereas the other witnesses said there were actually two independent UFOs. Who was the witness that said that one split in two?
That's interesting.
I think that was not one of the witnesses. It was Antonio Flores, one of the two people that went to the Pampa afterwards to hear the story for the first time. And when I interviewed him, he told me that he remembered one of the soldiers, or not speaking about two different lights, but only one that came down under the beneath the hill, and from that point a second light came off and went to encounter the group of soldiers.
Okay. Wow.
Now, there was a beam of light that washed out the whole area. Now, that is absolutely correct, because that did happen. There was a light that was so brilliant it washed out the whole area. So that was correct. Now, what about the perceptions about the UFOs? Exterior crab, boomerang shape, inside craft, shape of an egg, cracked open, sphere inside, and ribs around that are the power source. There is jagged foam insulation. No controls.
Again, with remote viewing, with these kinds of targets, it's very speculative because there is no feedback. We will probably never know any feedback for this. And so I think the viewers were speculating, just looking, and they are told to be honest, just to report what they see, what they perceive, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, drawing. Some of them actually did some clay models, and much of
clay
what they
models.
Yeah, this is part of the remote viewing session, but it was they do sketches and they do models. I have a couple of these sketches, but it's what they've already been talking about. It's nothing new. They get some information, and then they'll go in and they'll sketch, and they'll also clay model what they were perceiving. And the modeling is important because the act of modeling elicits more information. It's a kinesthetic activity.
And what did the clay models look like?
They were basically the same kinds of things, the boomerang shape. I'd have to go back and take a look at my files again, because the students, because we're on Zoom, I don't have the models, but they did send me some pictures.
Yeah, I saw some sketches. Now, one person said about the occupants, 2 ETs involved, but sense more races, gray and something else, silvery greenish complexion, very thin and short, but perceived them sitting, bulbous heads, large squinty eyes. Yeah, and like you say, this is maybe speculation. Now, there were some things that didn't seem to fit or didn't make sense.
Yeah.
For example, a bridge to 14.
Again, I don't know. Information, and as well as getting the information about the target, there may be other stuff that's picked up, extraneous stuff. I think probably the man looking through the binoculars might have been another time, another event where somebody was out there looking through binoculars at the location. So in remote viewing, sometimes if you don't have a particular location and time, and you're just exploring, you do tend to bop around in time and space
Hmm.
and pick up other stuff.
Now,
So
this
I think there's unexplained, yeah.
this one comment, a bridge or perception, a bridge to 14. Did you make anything out of that, Patricio? A bridge to 14? Any significance to that you can think
I
of?
don't. I have no idea. No.
Now, what about one of the remote viewers perceived that an alternative word for abduction is dressage or dressage?
Dressage, yeah, I'd only
Yeah.
heard that in relation to horses. So I think they were getting two concepts, intermixed. I'd never heard of the word dressage being an alternative word for abduction, but I haven't gone and researched that.
Any comments, Patricio, on dressage?
I don't know what that is. I have no idea. No.
I
course.
think in like the Lippens, the stallions in Austria, where they have them as doing very fancy footwork, is called dressage.
Mhm.
It's when a horse is going through some very, very structured movements on command. So
Now, this perception of the word dressage or the concept, was that in the blind viewing? Do we know?
this was in the third session where they now had a little bit of feedback.
So they
Yeah,
already
about
would have.
what they'd already perceived, yeah.
Okay. So, Patricio, do you have some questions for Angela?
I think that's remarkable that the remote viewers perceive that has a relation with horses, and they didn't know that there were horses in that place and
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's remarkable from that point of view. Now, I really don't have the opportunity to speak with people like you, Angela, who have done this kind of research. So remote viewing, are there people that can go back in time to, for example, the time of Christ or the time of to see how they built the pyramids in Egypt, stuff like that? I
Yes.
never heard about that.
Yes, that remote viewing, when I spend 2 days bringing students up to speed with remote viewing before we actually do this 1 day big project. And I give them all sorts of projects. Some of them are historical. We looked at Amelia Earhart in a big project a few years ago and perceived her on Saipan Island in the Marianas as a prisoner of the Japanese, which turns out that she actually was. There's documentation found in the archives in Washington, D.C., that she actually was a prisoner on Saipan Island. So you could go actually to events in the past. But until you get feedback, of course, it's speculative.
That's
I
interesting.
didn't know. I didn't know that you worked with Mr. Robert Bigelow. It's a very
for a couple of
important
years.
person, and he's been very involved in the study of UFOs or UAP, how they are called now, and now he's studying the consciousness and the
That's
life
right. He's got a
after
competition.
death.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Colm Kelleher
Okay.
from NIDS in 2004,
Uh-huh.
right before the NIDS was disbanded. But
Yeah.
I have never had the chance to contact Mr. Bigelow directly.
Yeah, he's an interesting man.
Now, is it possible, Angela, is it possible that remote viewers can pick up information from the client and mix it up with the target?
Of course. Yeah. In fact, my last class that I had already done some work with a French professor. He lives just outside France. He's retired, very smart man. And he had this tiny scrap of papyrus about the size of a small postage stamp that he wanted information about. So I did some work on that for him. Then
Oh,
he wanted
wow.
more information about its history. And I felt I was too, what's called front loaded, too much information about it. So I gave it to the class. And the first session they did, they were picking up information about the client, which I told them that's what they were getting, but they needed to go. And they did mention this they were talking about letters and things that were written. And one woman even said papyrus. So I said, I need to know about this object, this papyrus. Go and get me more information for their second session. But that's true. They can pick up information about the client. But that just tells me they're what's called on signal line, is they're going to where the information is, but the client didn't even know the information about this papyrus. He has to go now and research this piece of papyrus to confirm to us, give us feedback.
And so how can you separate the two, the target and the information from the client? How do you?
Training and practice, years of training and practice to refine this skill. Yeah.
Excellent. Patricio, I understand you are currently working for a UFO organization. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but I couldn't say that it's a UFO organization. It's like the official office in Chile that receives reports of sightings and try to explain them away. It's the CFA. It's the name of the committee. You know, it's dependent on the equivalent in Chile to the FAA in the USA. So we receive reports from citizens and from pilots of UFO sightings and encounters, but the vast majority of the reports are about conventional objects that are confused, that are not identified on the at first sight, like these trails. Some planes, some airplanes leave these white trails in the sky. So there are some people that take pictures of these trails and they think that they are UFOs. Other people see the satellites, like the Starlink satellites, that are very impressive. They are like a train of lights in the sky.
I haven't seen it, but I heard of them.
And they don't know what they are, and they report them as UFOs, but there are satellites, the International Space Station also. And there are many pictures that people say, I took the picture, I didn't see it. When I took the picture, when they see the picture on the computer or anything, they notice the presence of some objects that turn out to be insects, or many cases of birds, flying birds, you know. So the vast majority of our cases are conventional objects that were not identified by the observer. We don't have like many unknown cases. We have
I was going to ask you about the percentage of unknowns.
very few of them.
Do you actually have to investigate? Do you have to go out in the field and talk to witnesses and investigate with your job?
That was before I began working for them, because with the pandemic, we can't go anywhere. But yeah, the idea was that. The idea was, I understand that my predecessors in the committee did that. They went out, they interviewed witnesses. Many of the exchanges are done virtually, by email or by phone calls. But I understand that before the pandemic, they also had face-to-face interviews with the witnesses. Yes.
Yeah.
So are you working on a new book, Patricio?
Yeah. I began working on this new book on UFO cases in Chilean. That they are Chilean UFO cases that I think that are very relevant. There are 13 cases that took place between 1956 and 1998, and they were covered by the news media. So I am basing my research on these newspaper clippings, and also I have been able to track down the witnesses for some of those cases, and I have interviewed them again after many years. So yeah, I finished writing that book on the first week of January. So now I'm very interested in publishing this new book.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent.
This case, Valdés case, Pampa Yuskuma sighting, is in this book also, but it's like a very short summary of the of the book, the first book.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, congratulations, and look forward to seeing that.
Thank
So,
you.
Angela, what are you working on?
I'm always busy.
Exactly.
I continue to write. You know, I have quite a few books out there that need revision, and they're up on Amazon. I'm teaching online. I'm part of an organization. It's called the International Remote Viewing Association, IRVA, that I helped. I was one of the original founders and directors. We've been going 20 years. And we're gearing up for a conference in the fall, if we can get there. You know, everything's speculative right now. So I keep busy with lots of different activities, and you know, we'll continue to teach and write and research, and I enjoy what I'm doing.
And excellent. And Patricio, Patricio, do you have a website or contact on the internet?
No, when I published the book, I had a website, but I closed the website many years ago. But I'm on the internet, on the social media. I am on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I use Facebook very much, and I'm also on Instagram. But I don't really use Instagram. I use mostly Facebook, a little bit Twitter. I have a blog, but it's not about UFOs. It's about everything.
So
Really.
your organization that you're working for now, they have a website?
Oh, they do. It's
What is that?
It's www.cefaa.gov.cl. It's like a government website, you know. We are a government organization.
How many people working in your office? May I ask?
Very few. We are four.
Four.
It's the head of the office, who is also a journalist. He's a journalist and a history professor, Hugo Camus. Then there's the main researcher and investigator that is a science teacher, a science professor, Gustavo Arriagada, and he's a really good researcher.
That's the best kind.
Yeah, he's he immediately he analyzed pictures, videos, and he can catch lens flares and birds and insects and anything that caused the sighting. There's me, and there's an assistant. We are four.
Wow. And is this a government-financed operation or private?
Yeah. No, it's a government. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. And Angela, you have a website, correct?
Yeah, it's of course www. It's mindwiseconsulting.com, MINDWISE consulting.com. And it's the same as my email address, which is mindwiseconsulting@gmail.com. And I'm open to questions if people need to.
And one thing I didn't ask you, what is your opinion about this case? Do you think something anomalous happened, or what was your reaction?
I think it's definitely anomalous. Again, when you're talking about recollection and memory and speculation, it's not always clear cut. Something definitely happened. Getting to the root of it and the actual, I was hoping that the viewers would come through with something that could be checked out, perhaps. That's the whole purpose of remote viewing, is to give additional information. So I think and listening today to the, to all the information that you brought out, Patricio, was very interesting, stuff I'd never heard before. And I'm hoping when you have this up on YouTube, I'd like to send the link to the viewers for them to get some feedback and to go, oh yes, I said that and I said that. It's good to get feedback because that then hones your skills.
Well, exactly. And then Patricio and Angela, I want to give you both a huge thanks. I can't thank you both enough for this interview. I really enjoyed it. I want to wish you both continued success with your amazing projects, and keep in touch, and just thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really a honor to speak with you and with Angela. It's a very interesting work.
Well, for me too, to meet you two guys and hear all this great information. That was very, very exciting to hear this stuff.
And again, thank you. My gratitude is eternal, and we'll keep in touch and keep posted on new material and projects. Well, thank you and good night.
Good night.
Bye.